Welcome everybody. This is the last of our electricity review sessions, and this one will be a little bit different than the 10 we've done before this for a few reasons. One, this is being translated live in French onto the web, and so there is, if somebody's here and actually prefers to read the slides in French, we actually only have one screen, but you can actually go on our website at the moment and watch the slides in French as well. I want to welcome everybody who is here. It's a great turnout here, actually. We should have said we were going to webcast them all because everybody wants to be a live studio audience or something. And also welcome to everybody who's watching online. I know there are people sitting at home on their couch with their dogs watching this, and there are people out with their kids, and a couple people called me, told me they're on their smartphones at the kids' hockey game. So that's great that people are participating. The format's going to be a little bit different than we've done in the previous ones, just to address the folks who are online as well as the folks everywhere else. And we have a few more staff here than we usually do to accommodate this. There's a great team in the back from Communications Nova Scotia who's managing the webcast, and then there's a bunch of people who are going to help us facilitate later the workshop portion of this from the Department of Energy. And there's some engineers and so forth in the room. I would want to, if I'm not talking loud enough, let me know. I'm wearing a mic, but it's actually for the webcast, so we're trying not to put it through the speakers in the room because otherwise we might get feedback and that'll just drive everybody nuts. So if I'm not loud enough, just let me know. One of the things that, one person I did want to introduce that's here who you may want to talk to at the end if you have any questions that are not really about what we're doing, but about Nova Scotia Power. Bob Hamp is there at the back. He's the president of Nova Scotia Power. He's graciously agreed to stick around and answer any questions if you have them specific about Nova Scotia Power, for example. So, as I said, so this is going to work a bit different than usual. Normally, I talk and do a presentation, and then we do a workshop, and then we do question and answer. This will be a little bit different. I'm going to do the presentation that happens. Then we're actually going to take 10 or 15 minutes as I answer some of the questions that have been coming in online when this started a few minutes ago. I know there's already a few that have come in. Then we will do the workshop part, and then we'll do question and answers for the people who are live here in the room. And it's just that way so that we can get to the end of the webcast and people don't have to sit around at home during the workshop portion wondering what's going on until we get to the question and answer session. So rest assured, if you're in this room, you will get a chance to do that as well. So on your tables, you will see, and hopefully everybody has one. If you don't, raise your hand because we can get you one as one of these little, almost like a little remote control. Don't take them home. I see somebody over here needs one. Please, so just raise your hand and Amber will pass one out if you don't have one. You're going to see where those are important later. It's really just a matter of getting people engaged, and what we found sometimes is when we ask a question like, who's your favorite hockey team, if people feel peer pressure and won't vote for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So what happens is everybody raises their hand for the same thing. This allows you to vote without raising your hands. It's not a statistical summary or anything like that. So we've been going through this for a while now. In 2013, the very first bill that our government passed was the Electricity Reform Act, and it did two things. First thing it did was allow renewable retailers to sell directly to customers, and that's going through the board process at the moment to set the tariffs and the regulations around that. And the second part was it said, listen, we haven't for over a decade actually looked holistically at our entire electricity system. And our goal is to find out where are we going to go in the future, because we have a lot of questions to answer, and there are a lot of options, and you're going to see that today. And I'm going to tell you right now, there are no right answers and there are no wrong answers in this. They are all really just options. And at the end of the day, Nova Scotians have to define where we go with that. And as we've gone around, there's been a lot of similarities, and this being the wrap-up meeting, as we go through, I'll actually give you a sense of what people have said elsewhere in the province. But there's been a lot of differences depending on where you are. As you can imagine, down in Digby at our very first meeting, everybody wanted tidal energy, and they wanted tidal energy to be the sole energy supplier in Nova Scotia. And then in Cape Breton, it was different. We'll talk about that. So there are three areas that we recently had studies done. They're online if you want to read them. Supply and demand, emerging technologies, and governance. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So the full studies are online. There's also sort of what I would call the Reader's Digest version of those studies to give you a summary of what they suggested and what they found when they looked at our market. And this is hopefully going to sort of set give you some background information on the way the world is today in Nova Scotia, according to the experts. And listen, some of their stuff's opinion. It's not necessarily right either, but it's important for you to know what experts have said looking at our system. This is phase 2 of this review. Phase 1 was having those studies done. Phase 2 is going out and really having a wide open discussion about the electricity market and options for generation and so forth, and the pros and cons of different things. Phase 3, we're going to be going and talking with some of the stakeholders who regularly appear at the board, like the real engineering types and the technical people and the legal and regulatory people, to really talk about some of the things that have come out of this session. We'll be posting online the feedback we've received from these sessions, which will give you a chance to see some of the varying feedback from different parts of the province. And you'll see that in some, you might hear this today, in some meetings, one table says something completely different from the other table that's competing, and that happens a lot. So, and then after that, we're going to present, by the time we hit May, there's going to be an opportunity for feedback all the way along. So if you say, hey, listen, my feelings weren't included in that report, you send them in, we'll make sure they're included. When we get to May, we'll be tabling a report in the legislature that will outline all the feedback we've heard across the province, and hopefully we'll categorize it in some meaningful way so that you can see what people have said. And that will lead to September, when we will release the electricity plan for Nova Scotia for really what will be the next couple of decades. So what we're doing today, as I said, we're planning for the next 20 years. We're really not planning for tomorrow. That planning was done years ago. And you can see that we built the last coal plant in Nova Scotia in the 1980s up at Point Coney. And obviously that's generating our electricity today, and that will be around for decades to come. Because those plants get amortized off and so forth. But the decisions we make in the next few years really are going to impact where we go a couple of decades out. I'm sorry if I'm standing in front of you there. I'll try not to do that. So, as I said, we've done technical studies on the emerging technologies, governance, market. We've held 10 sessions. This is the 11th. This is our wrap-up one. This is our opportunity to sort of get everybody from across the province online and so forth who hasn't been here, and obviously you as well. So we're going to start just so you can figure out how to use these clicker boxes. And for those online, you will have a chance to vote. We're going to put up a SurveyMonkey survey that's much more in depth later on that everybody will get to participate in. We tried to make these work for the at-home viewers, but they wouldn't. So if you just want to, you can press whichever number you want, or letter, sorry, on here. And the options here, if you can't read them from the back, are A, I want to learn more about the electricity system, and this is, why did you come here today? B, I want to lower power rates. C, I think we should use more renewables. D, I want to suggest a change to Nova Scotia Power. E, all of the above, or F, none of the above. So just pick one. Whatever the last one you press is going to be the one that shows up on the system. It'll only actually count one of your votes. And as I say, there is no right or wrong answer. We are not, I can promise you, as we go through these questions, and you'll see more challenging ones, if you will, we're not going to go at the end of this and say, well, you know, there were 300 people attended or 400 people attended all these meetings, and this many said that they want, I don't know, they want to use more renewables, so that's what we're going to do. This is really just so you have a sense of what the room is feeling. So you can see number 3, I think we should use more renewables, about 48%, and a pretty even split among everything else there. So some people, none of the above, a few people, all of the above, and obviously the others, I want to learn more about the system, I want to lower power rates, and a few people want to suggest a change. So there's a good mix in the room. And listen, I also understand that a lot of these questions are a bit unfair because we get you to pick one, and really there's probably 2 you care about, or 3, so that's important. So this is what we've learned so far from the technical studies. First of all, we actually have enough electricity in the province that's been approved or online straight through to 2030. So this process is not about trying to find generation to deliver electricity between now and 2030. That is pretty much set. We're ready to go on that. We meet all the regulations that are in place, and that 2030, you'll see as we go through this presentation, is a magic number, because 2030 is when a lot of the current agreements and regulations start to expire. Now, we don't know exactly how much electricity we need, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. But that is going to be an important thing to consider and to understand why we're thinking 2030 and beyond. So we know that innovation is important, and we'll talk about the different kinds of innovation, but it also has a cost. Now, some of that cost is worth it, and some might not be. The studies also tell us that we can introduce some competition in the market, but you can't introduce a completely wide open market where we just let things go wild and people just run around and set up systems and they aren't regulated by the board, because that just isn't going to work. We only have about 500,000 customers. We only have 950,000 residents. It's just not a big enough market. We need better access to other markets. And the last thing the studies found is that around the world, the cost of service model for pricing electricity is changing, and it's becoming far less common. And what that is when you get your bill today, Nova Scotia Power goes to the Utility and Review Board. They say, we have this much stuff. We got to pay for the amortization of it. We got to pay for some capital deferral on it. And here's the cost of the linesman and so forth. And you basically get a bill made out of that. But it doesn't have a relationship to standards like performance or reliability or meeting environmental targets or safety or things like that. And so a lot of jurisdictions are now moving away from that model to a new model, which is more performance-based, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. This cost of service model originates from the days when we built big nuclear plants or big coal plants or oil plants, and everything was really big. Now you only need to drive around the province and see that there's all different kinds of generation in this province, and there's a real mix of things. And that cost of service model doesn't work in the same way for that. So you won't be able to read this from back there, but so I'll read it for you. Last year, we generated about 64% of our electricity from coal, petcoke, and oil. We did 20% from renewable electricity domestically, 4% is other, which is essentially just imports, and 12% was natural gas. There is one natural gas plant in the province, and that's in Dartmouth at Tufts Cove. And it burns either natural gas or oil, bunker sea oil, depending on whether it is, depending on cost, environmental rules, and so forth. Oh, sorry. We might put a little bit of it through the house system if we can too. Sorry. And if I'm not speaking loud enough, just let me know. We're just trying to avoid you getting feedback in the speakers too. So by 2020, we will be at 27% domestic renewables, and this is all based on stuff that's approved and underway now. 23% imported renewables, 4% others. So that's still that imported amount. Natural gas be about the same, around 10%. Coal and oil be down around 20%, so it's quite a drop. And there'll be a bit that's floating between natural gas and coal or oil, depending on prices and environmental rules. This is important. So there are two targets we need to make. By next year, we have to hit 25% renewables. We will exceed that without any problem. We're really already in that range now. The 2020 target, we have to be at 40% renewables. We will be over 50% by that point. So this is one of the things that has come up in a number of meetings, or that people thought coming into the meetings, well, geez, we still need to go and approve a whole bunch of renewables to hit the existing targets. We have enough approved and enough approved through the rate base and through large projects like South Canoe or so forth, that we will actually exceed those targets by some significant margin. So there are a number of things that affect supply. Federal environmental requirements are a big one. I think most of you are aware there are mercury emission rules. There are, the federal government recently announced coal rules. We are anticipating they will introduce rules on natural gas generation at some point in the next few years and so forth. So those impact us. And those sometimes are actually impacted by international requirements. Another thing is some renewables require backup. We recently funded and supported a project down in Brooklyn where they're using compressed air to store energy from wind turbines, or they're going to try and do that. It's a very exciting technology developed by a young woman from Dartmouth, actually, Danielle Fong. And it's very, very exciting. But we need that on a much bigger scale for certain renewables to really go at any great clip. Our wind contracts are actually starting to expire. It seems like only a few years ago we started putting wind in, but the first wind farm, which was in Pubnico, is actually competing with coal now for the cost of generation, and that in the next few years will expire, the contract, which means it'll be time to renew that or not renew it. And those are decisions we will have to make. The reason that 2030 date mattered a lot at the beginning was because there are a lot of them that start coming offline in terms of the contracts around 2030. So that starts to really matter at that point in terms of the original ones included the capital cost of construction and so forth. So we could, in fact, see the cost of some of those contracts come down at some measure at that point, because it would be continuing the operation of an existing infrastructure with obviously maintenance and return and so forth. I think we all understand price volatility. You only need to look at the world oil markets the past couple of days to see that. And of course, the other thing that's going to affect it is connections to other markets. The maritime link, one of its biggest benefits is not, in fact, bringing energy in from Muskrat Falls. It's actually the fact that we connect to other markets and we'll be able to import energy from other sources. And that's actually where we end up with the biggest impact, because we can now move around. It allows us to put more renewables on the grid and so forth. So getting to the next question, and listen, this is not all the options, and it's also not fair. I know people don't want to choose just one sometimes, but when you think about selecting your energy source, where energy should come from, which is the most important? Is it the environment? Is it economic development? And that can really mean two things. The COMFIT program was designed to create economic opportunities in communities. But at the same token, the coal plants were really built as an economic opportunity for Cape Breton largely, right? So the immediate cost. So what matters is what the cost is in the short term. Stable and predictable rates. So really, the immediate cost is less of a concern than knowing where rates are going over the long term. Or is it energy security? What we mean by that is just saying we will generate enough energy in Nova Scotia that we don't have to worry about getting anything from anybody else. So just pick the one that's most important to you. And as I say, I know there are other options too. There are usually at least as many other options as we have put up there. So again, you start seeing a bit of a different mix, right? So we have environment up around 49%. And interesting, I said I would tell you what happened in some other parts of the province. So down in Digby, environment was again one of the top ones. In many other areas, stable and predictable rates were by far the top one. Energy security came up the highest, I think, in, might have been Antigonish. But so there are differences in different parts of the province, and quite honestly, differences in terms of who comes out to different meetings and so forth. In Port Hawkesbury, it was, I think it was economic development that came up. But you'll start to see those differences. But you can see that all of those are important. Oh, here we go. So here's the provincial results so far, not including the session, just in case you're interested. And you can see that stable rates in the environment and really economic development and energy security are all in that 20 to 30% range. And that's what we've seen at the meetings. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that those meetings are a statistically relevant sample. Obviously, they're not, but it is sort of interesting to know what other people are saying. And I didn't know that graph was going to be there, so that's great. So one of the questions we need to answer is how much electricity do we need? Tough question, because we need to plan it out decades. Because when you build a plant, especially if you build a large-scale wind farm or a fossil fuel plant, you have it for a long time. The latest projections, so this puts us here at 2014, and this takes us basically out to 2040. We might need an increase right up to 13 terawatt hours. We're down around 11. Somebody pointed out this doesn't start at 0, it starts at 7 terawatt hours. Or it could drop right down to 8 terawatt hours. And that's a problem. That's a problem for us because we're trying to plan a future without really knowing how much energy we're going to need. We predict it'll probably be somewhere in the middle. And that's traditionally where these things have happened. But these are the kind of things that impact it. If everybody went to electric cars, we would need all kinds more electricity in this province over that period of time. Now, that might be a good thing. It's hard to know, but you would still need to generate that. If we had other industries come on or come off, and we saw that with Bowater, where suddenly we dropped a significant chunk of our energy needs. Port Hawkesbury Paper uses around 11% of our entire load in this province. So you can imagine that a user such as that comes offline or comes online, that's huge. And family size and population growth is huge. And those are the kind of things that are difficult to predict. The other thing that's a challenge for us is the winter versus the summer peak. So we are a winter peaking utility. And one of the reasons for that is obviously heating and cooling. We use 2,200 megawatts of energy in the winter, but we only use 700 in the summer. And we can look at that and go, wow, aren't we really efficient in the summer because we don't use air conditioners, we open the window. it's actually a real problem for us in terms of planning the future of the electricity system, because we need to plan for a future where we can deliver 2,200 megawatts, but one where we don't want to have to pay for 2,200 megawatts in the summer because we have because obviously you have it sitting there and you don't need it. So there are options with this. You can generate the energy and you can export it, obviously, and one of the things the Maritime Link does is allow you to do that. You can have options that really provide different generation. You can have energy efficiency, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. You can switch to other sources for heating and so forth. There are lots of ways to deal with this, but not all of it can be dealt with as easily as you might think. One of the problems we have is legacy housing. So we could change the rules for how you heat houses in this province. We could say you're not allowed to put electric heaters in, right? Which sounds really simple, but we still have lots of apartment buildings and lots of buildings with the old electric baseboard heaters that some of the ones that have been put in are basically like turning a curling iron on your home and heating your home with it. Because it's an electric wire that you heat up, and it is the single most inefficient way to heat your home. So I just put that there because it is actually a problem for us, because you don't want to pay for energy production that you don't need. So we're going to talk, and the storage, you can't store really from one season to the other. You can store a few days, or you can store a period of time, but you are limited. So this is where innovation comes in. There are a lot of ways you can use innovation. You can change how you use and manage electricity, or you can change how you produce it. So the producing, I'm sure everybody in this room understands you can change how you produce it. Tidal, solar, wind, geothermal, all kinds of, I mean, there are more options. You can Google it and you'll come up with hundreds of different options. Or you can change how you use and manage it. So smart grid technology is one option. A lot of places were early adopters, that didn't work out so well. But the newer adopters are finding opportunities where you can change how you use your electricity, the time of day rates. But those have costs too. If you have a time of day rate that you pay at the peak periods for your electricity, that also means when you go home at supper time to cook dinner, if you're using an electric stove, it's going to cost you more to do that. You have to be willing to shift your behavior. So you do your laundry at night or on the weekend when the rates are cheaper. You put your dishwasher on a timer, things like that. Those are the kind of things. The other, in terms of managing electricity, batteries, I talked about the light sales option are some of the things we can do. So this gets us thinking about where our electricity should actually come from. And again, there are 100 different ways you can generate electricity, but these are the ones that come up most often in Nova Scotia in terms of, that big number at the moment is coal and oil. So we know that big number is slipping, and it's going to continue to slip over time. We're not going to be going out and building coal plants. We know that. So we have A is solar, because I know you can't read it back. B is wind, C is coal, D is tidal, E is imported hydro, F is natural gas, G is biomass, and H is diverse sources. And yes, there are 100 other ones that could be on that list, so it's an unfair question. But and every time we ask, there's like one more person that doesn't press the button. Oh, there we go. Oh, see? Now we got more people. So this, I assume there's going to be a graph after this that will show this, but you see there's some with solar, some with wind, some with tidal. The only place where tidal was the highest was Digby, and everybody in the room chose tidal. It was amazing. But we didn't do that. But so in everywhere else, and all you need to know about this one is everywhere else in the province, pretty much everybody chose diverse sources. So there is a much larger version of this graph on our website if you want to see more fuel sources. So we just picked some out. I'm going to read them across. There may be a card on some tables that actually has this graph, but this is the relative cost of different types of energy. Now, we can argue about whether this graph is correct or not, and everybody who has an interest in one of these will argue it, I'm sure. So this is from one of the studies we had done that looking at all the averages around the world, what are the costs of delivering it? The other question somebody's going to ask me, because they have it every meeting, is why isn't tidal on this list? There are no commercially large enough tidal arrays in the world yet to actually be able to give you a fair assessment. So energy efficiency is obviously the cheapest, right? The reason we didn't put that on the other list is because you still got to turn the lights on. So we know that anything that we can do to stop having to generate is going to save us money. So geothermal, biomass, and that's commercial scale. These are all commercial scale, by the way. These are not the COMPIT ones. Biomass, wind, hydro, combined cycle natural gas, nuclear, coal, basically a different type of coal, solar PV, fuel cells, and solar thermal. And that's solar thermal for generating electricity. It gives you a sense of just the direction they go, and we can argue about where things go. And you can see there's a wide range for wind, and there's a wide range for gas, because obviously gas prices jump and they go up and down. But it just gives you a sense. So when you think about that, does this change the same? This is the exact same question as before. Does this change the generation source that you would pick as the best one for Nova Scotia? So it really doesn't change. It changed a little bit, but not very much. Now, I can tell you, we put this has been the same everywhere, but we put this question on originally, and we thought about taking it off because people weren't changing, but we decided this is still illustrative, that we put this on making an assumption that we were wrong about. We assumed that we would ask the first question, and everybody would pick whatever their favorite thing is, you know, wind or solar or coal, and that would be it, right? We figured we'd go to Cape Breton, they'd choose coal. We'd go to Digby, they'd choose tidal, and then we'd show the graph and everybody would pick something else at the end. But interestingly, and this has been a learning experience for us, everybody has chosen diverse, or not everybody, but a lot of people have chosen diverse sources on both sides, which is, as you can see, 59% of all the people before this meeting chose diverse sources. And that 11% for tidal is seriously all in Digby. Every single person at that meeting chose tidal. It was amazing. That's what happens when you go and do it on the same day as a tidal conference or sort of the port days. But you can see, I mean, there's lots of interest in different things. And the advantage of diverse sources is exactly what you're seeing with coal now. A lot of our cost increases over recent years have been due to the increase in the cost of coal. I think most people understand that. And sometimes the shipping, and it goes up and down and so forth. We know that we've been impacted by natural gas prices in recent years. And so if you have diversity, you get a bit of protection. It's kind of like hedging. It's kind of like having a mutual fund where you buy all different things. So in terms of, there's two last things I just want to talk about briefly. One is smart technology. I mentioned smart grids. Now, the other thing that it can do is it can allow you to get better use out of tidal and wind opportunities. You can, especially with tidal, we can look 15 years in the future and know exactly what the velocity will be. We'll know exactly what time the tides will come in and out. We can predict with some level of certainty what the range will be and so forth. We can't do that for anything else. But it shifts. So that might not be all that useful to us. But there are some people who have said, well, listen, I could plan my manufacturing around a tidal table. Well, that might be an option for somebody. Around wind, some of that technology or grid enhancement might allow you to shift wind around, and especially as we get into a more regional grid with the Atlantic provinces, especially the Maritimes, you know, we could have wind going up in northern New Brunswick and picking up wind energy from there and then shifting ours up that way when it's not as windy up there. There are all kinds of options like that. We can also try and avoid the peaks in the winter with some of the smart technology. I talked about shifting it through smart grids, and we can help people manage their electricity usage. So the last thing that I sort of want to get into is the issue of governance. I already talked about the fact we're a tiny market. I think everybody gets that. We are not New York. We are not Ontario. We're not California. But that doesn't mean we don't have options. And we actually have some unique options that some other places don't have. We have some options around microgrids and so forth that may not actually exist in some of those other big areas. But the other thing we can do is look at things like performance-based regulations, which are being done in small and large areas. And now, performance-based regulations, are really based on the idea that certain things are really, really important. Now, there's 100 more than this, just like every other slide. But instead of making a return or a profit or whatever solely based on how much stuff you have or how much or what your costs are, there are incentives built into the rate process to deliver performance on things like, well, these, outage length or outage frequency, safety, and that'd be obviously safety for the public and the people that work there. communication to customers, just knowing what's going on, and of course meeting environmental targets. So if you want to pick, now I know there's 100, the two things I say, one, there are 100 more options. The second thing is you will never ever have a rate based on one of these. You would have a matrix of things. So, you know, this would be worth so many points and this would be worth so many points. If you ever have business and you bid on an RFP, most of them look a little bit like an RFP where you're trying to achieve points in different areas. Because one of the things that can happen is if you do this with just one thing, then the utility is incented to focus on that one thing and not go after and not deal with any of the other issues. So just give a second for the last few people to. So you can. So here, sorry, every room has a feel. So 61% environmental targets here. Outage frequency 21%, outage length 5%, and communication 13%. So provincially, you can see there was a real broad mix. Outage frequency and environmental targets up around 30%, outage length 15%, 11% safety, and 14% for communication with the public. So as you can see, there's, you know, this room was 69%, or I think it was 61% environmental targets. And before we got here, we were 31% on average across the province on that one. So you can see, like, there's a change as you go to different places in the province. And that's one of the challenges we have as a department, is coming up with something that works for all Nova Scotians. Not just people who live in Halifax, not just people who live in Pictou, not just stuff. We got to do everybody. I've talked about all these. These are the things, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about in this part, is there are a number of things that affect the cost of electricity. Fuel prices, obviously, mix of fuel, the cost of technology, we've talked about those, the environmental regulations cost money, capital investments cost, operating, nothing is free, right? That's all that slide's really meant to tell you, everything costs money. So I'd like you to, when you look at your Nova Scotia power bill, and this would be the same if you were in Antigonish and you know you were with the Antigonish utility or something. These are the things that people most often blame for the high price of their power bill. So is it and so I just want you to guess at what you think has the most impact. Is it the renewable electricity investment, corporate wages and benefits, the shareholder rate of return, or the profit basically, the cost of fuel, or the cost of energy efficiency programs? So cost of fuel. And I don't know, did we put a slide? No, we didn't. All right, so people generally get that right across the province, which is another one that surprised. There's only one place that there was actually a reasonably high percentage of one of the other ones, but that's good. I think people have come to realize that fuel is very expensive. So if you had a $100 power bill, and this is the my last slide for this section, this is how it would break down. About $38 is the cost of generation, so it's the plants and all that sort of stuff, and that's a couple of the items on that previous chart. $30 of that is fuel of your bill. So 30% of your bill is just the cost of putting coal in the plants, buying the power from wind turbines, and so forth, putting wood into the biomass plant. $8.30 is transmission, and transmission is the big lines that run town to town, basically. Distribution is the lines you see out in the street. So if you're in Antigonish, you would have your bill for the distribution part is really from the Antigonish utility, or in Berwick or so forth. Retail costs, that's basically running the show, right? Like, you know, you call the customer support line and all that sort of stuff. And executive compensation is 10 cents on a $100 bill. And people look at that and they go, wow, I didn't realize it was that low. But the reason it's that low is because about a year and a half ago, all parties in the legislature supported a bill that limited the cost of executive compensation that can be charged back to ratepayers on your bill. So anything above that amount is paid by shareholders. So that's why that's down there.
How do they pay the shareholders? How do the shareholders pay?
So that's right. I'm just going to, actually, it's a good question. So I was asked, for those of you online, how do they pay the shareholders? So they make a rate of return, which is this amount here. So this is the profit amount, if you will, which is what goes to shareholders. And the important thing to understand about that, and I'm not going to make a statement on whether it's too high or too low, and I mean, we could have an entire session just on that issue. But they use that for a couple things. One, people invest in the company, and that allows them to raise capital to build a wind farm or a coal plant or do any sort of capital upgrades. That's how they raise their money. So it's like going to the bank and getting money. And then they obviously use that to pay the portion of compensation that's not allowed to be paid for by rates. They make charitable donations through those amounts. Those aren't paid by rates. There's a number of things that are paid through as part of that. And obviously, there's trickles up to the shares where you can get dividends as well. So it covers a number of different things. And so one of the things that people say, well, you can reduce that amount, and you can. You can do anything. As I said, anything's on the table. The important thing to understand is where is that magic number where all of a sudden somebody else has to pay that cost of capital, right? So if we're going to raise money to put in a smart grid, somebody else has got to pay that. So it's just to give you an idea of how that bill breaks down. It obviously fluctuates bit to bit, and this is a residential bill, which is important because it is a bit different for commercial and industrial users, and again, we could be here all day on that. So now we are going to, we have some questions? Oh, we do. All right, so we have some questions from online. So we're going to take about 10 minutes and just answer a couple of questions that have come in online. Then we're going to do the workshop, and then we're going to talk about, and then we're going to take questions in this session because the folks online will no longer be with us unless they come driving down to St. Mary's or Dalhousie. And I should know that because I'm a Dal grad. So just, so I made that slip, but I'm a Dal grad. So there you go. So we have a number of questions that Amber is holding there, but so the first two that were emailed in, actually, it's a good question. It said, it is noted that closing any large industrial customers would shift the price of electricity to other customers. Was this part of the decision to leave Picto's northern pulp and paper open? And would this ever be a consideration to allow large industrials to continue operating even if they failed to meet or maintain environmental regulations? That was a very long question. It's actually a very good question. Interestingly enough, northern pulp generates most of its own electricity. So it actually has very little impact one way or the other in terms of if it's on or off the system. It's not the same, and when I say little impact, I'm talking about rates, obviously. It obviously has an impact in Pictou and so forth, but it has very little impact on rates because it's not like Bowater or Port Hawkesbury Paper where they're actually large energy users, and that's one of the things that people don't understand. So the question is whether that would be a consideration. It really isn't. It doesn't factor into our decisions. It did factor into the board's decision with Port Hawkesbury Paper, not in whether they should stay on the system, but differently whether they should be given a special rate for electricity. So they pay the incremental cost that we otherwise would have had to pay. And so it factored into the board's decision on their rate. So we have the future of tidal in Nova Scotia. Again, another hour-long presentation. We are hosting, anybody who's really interested in the future of tidal, we're hosting the International Conference on Ocean Energy in a couple of weeks, which is the first time it's ever been outside of Europe. So it's very exciting. People from all over the world are coming here to discuss tidal and wave energy and other things too. We will be, at the moment, actually at 5 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, they will be laying cables to one of the 4 berths at Force, which is in Parsborough. And so the future of tidal, I would say, is very strong. There are some of the largest companies in the world are involved in it. They predict that they can bring prices down below the cost of wind or competitive with the cost of wind. The conservative estimate for generation in the Bay of Fundy is 3,000 megawatts. You can go much, much higher, but that's a fairly conservative one. And there's an estimate that the spending in Nova Scotia alone, just from a very tiny portion of that industry, would be $10 to $50 billion. So it is a big, big industry. And obviously there aren't that many places in the world you can do it. The future of our tidal in our electricity mix. So one of the challenges with tidal is it runs all day, but it peaks every 11 and a half hours, which is a challenge. So it means that part of it actually, if you're going to do it at that scale, it really has to be for export. Or part of it has to be for export. It's the only way it really works, but that could benefit ratepayers in Nova Scotia, obviously. What percentage that will form is hard to tell at this point because we're trying to predict where it will go. The interesting thing is most of the large companies like Siemens, Lockheed Martin, Schottl, Emera, Open Hydro, they're all sort of converging on this date that they feel around that 2030 date they might by that point, sometime between now and then, they actually could be into commercial scale production, which if you remember from our earlier presentation, 2030 is a magic date, so that could work out really well for us. But I don't want to guess on a percentage. Do global prices give a sense of cost but don't vary by jurisdiction? Do we have local data on the price of renewables and efficiency? That's a good question. So this question is, the chart we showed you was global prices. Very important, but really the question is, what's the local cost? We are very competitive with the international costs. When you look at those costs, we're very, very similar. And to give you an idea, at least on the generation side of renewables, I recently met with the Quebec government, and our latest wind contracts are much cheaper than the ones they were able to negotiate. So in some areas we do better, some areas not quite as well, but we're pretty similar to the world costs on renewables. On energy efficiency, it's interesting because we have hit all of the low-hanging fruit already, which is the changing of the light bulb. Now, you can walk into any room, including the legislature, and see lots of incandescent bulbs, but we've really hit most of the low-hanging fruit. They are now into the much more expensive energy efficiency options, which are changing out motors in industrial plants and things like that. So there are always options, and part of it really is around building standards in the future and that sort of thing. The role of solar in Nova Scotia. Well, I figured that was going to come up in the room if it didn't come up online. So they're reading if you're wondering what they're doing over there, they're reading their emails as they're coming in, because people are on Twitter and email. There you go. So one of our challenges on solar is very important, and actually here in Halifax it's interesting because you could walk around and look at the large roofscapes like the office towers, the Costco's, the Walmarts of the world. They are great locations for solar. One of the challenges gets back to that chart showed you where our biggest opportunity, or where we use our most generation, is in the winter. Our best solar opportunity is in the summer because the days are longer. Now, we have one of the best solar regimes in the world, no question about that. But we need to address that issue of how, if we're going to put large-scale solar generation in when we already are generating too much energy in the summer anyways, we need to figure out what markets that would be sold through. The immediate best opportunity for solar is really around solar thermal, in my opinion. And my department recently funded or provided funding to the Halifax Regional Municipality to help with their Solar City project to move out some really interesting things where you can fund solar thermal panels through your property tax bills and so forth. So if you can't afford it, or you don't have, if you don't have the capital or you don't have the line of credit to do it, you have another option. So there is a role for solar. There's probably also a role for solar in terms of microgrids, in terms of self-generation and net metering and so forth. So we are going to meet the renewable targets. What step is next? Greener, cheapest. That's exactly what this is about at some level. So we are going to beat the targets. We actually, we've spent some time with some of the European jurisdictions, and we are well ahead of places like Germany in terms of renewable targets, and we will have much more renewable energy on the grid than Germany, which is the one everybody points on next year. And in the years to come, we will use far less coal than they will. So we are doing very, very well, but this is part of the question, is what is the generation we want next? I don't envision, and I don't think Nova Scotia Power envisions building coal plants anymore, because nobody builds large generation anymore. It just doesn't make sense, especially in small markets. So renewable energy does suit itself to a smaller generation.
When you refer to much less coal in Germany, are you meaning per capita, or are you talking?
Yeah, in terms of percentage of electricity generation. Yeah, they're a much bigger market, so obviously as a country they use, yeah. But no, it's really about as the percentages. So I think we probably time for a couple more online questions.
Future of large wind in the province.
The future of large wind, all right. So the question, I'm answering them fast and they're writing them. So what is the future of large wind in the province? We actually have managed, as I said, to get large wind down to a price that is cheaper than some other jurisdictions have managed to do it. We have taken large wind out of the COMFIT program, and for those of you who don't know what COMFIT is, that's sort of the community scale renewable. There's a couple of reasons we've done that. We've also taken large biomass out of the COMFIT program. There's two reasons. One, we have enough electricity till 2030. So there is and we're reviewing the COMFIT program generally, because one of the issues we have now is we've now hit and vastly exceeded the renewable energy targets. And that's fine, you could still be putting it online, but one of the challenges we actually have more than enough electricity on the system now. So you actually, if you're going to generate it, you have to have somebody to sell it to and somebody to pay for it. So adding generation at the moment is a real challenge. So there are no large projects proposed at this point for wind or for any other generation at the moment. There are still some small COMFIT projects done, but I envision that you probably will see more large wind in the future as other generation comes off. There have been talk about projects built solely for export that actually they would be solely for export. They wouldn't even be for local purposes, although they would feed into our grid, obviously. But all right, so that's the end of our 10 minutes on the webcast, I guess. So we will respond to any other questions that we continue to receive by email, but also when we publish the report, we're going to put answers to all the questions that we've received there, and as part of these forums as well, as part of that report that we put up in the next couple of months. So anybody that didn't type fast enough to get in, and obviously I'm speaking to the people at home, we will address those and you will get answers to them. We will get you an answer. I know some people sent in 6 and 7 questions, so we only answered a couple of the ones you sent in to get to others. So thank you. If you were on the webcast, thank you very much for tuning in. And please go to our website to check out more information, and you can still submit comments and information.